This is the Almost Daily Zencast. Hello and namaste. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode. I am your humble host, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. Let's get started. Hello and namaste. It's 12:21 Pacific Standard Time on a Monday in the middle of a February on the 22nd day. I guess not really the middle. It's the end of February. February 22nd. Hello, friends. Welcome back to the show. Thank you, as always, for tuning in and supporting this absurd little project. Your support is deeply appreciated, especially in these turbulent times, which seem to be finally shifting and changing towards something different. What a wild and wacky week or three it has been. Yes. Let's begin with some local pain and suffering and honor that. Dear everyone in Texas, my heart goes out to you. If I was a millionaire, I'd be donating lots of money. I'm not, tragically. But I believe in the power of prayer. I believe in the power of sending thoughts and energy. I think it can be faked. I think people can lip service it and bullshit it, but I think it can also be real and genuine. So I humbly invite you, dear listeners, to take a moment and acknowledge and honor the suffering going on there, as well as all over the world. Because as someone interestingly pointed out on social media recently, neighbor is not a geographically limited term. It is about our relation to all, right? I deeply, very badly paraphrased that. I'm not sure how it was originally written. It's not in front of me, but you get the idea. We are all neighbors, whether you're here or there or somewhere else. We are on this living womb together. It is giving birth to us all at once. So, Texas, I'm really, really saddened by what happened, right? And as we all should. And if we can give and or help and or if we're close enough to volunteer, amen for all those efforts. I think that one of the things going on besides the immediate tragedy, the human drama of what happened there, of ordinary people having their lives completely disrupted by something that they themselves personally could not control. There's obviously layers and layers of other things going on. There's the political shenanigans of pointing fingers and laying blame. Ted Cruz went to Mexico. AOC raised money. There goes all the political arguments about how AOC hates Republicans or whatever. And it's a mess, is my point. There are good things happening. There, as always, it's something that Americans pride themselves in, but I think it should be acknowledged as a deep down, authentic, genuine aspect of all humanity, is that when we see our fellow neighbors and community members going through pain and suffering, especially if we ourselves are going through something similar, we unite in helping one another. It's the miracle of humanity that in some of the worst conditions, people transcend political ideology and help the person in front of them. Now, this isn't an absolute. As I like to point out quite often, no human endeavor is absolute in its nature in any way, shape, or form. Having said all that, it's beautiful to see that Texas is recovering, although hopefully they won't be hit by another Arctic blast. There's been talk about it, but I'm not sure if it's actually come to fruition or not. Weather is weirdly variable that way. The weather predictive services can never be 100% accurate. So there's a lot of people arguing instead of helping. And that's tragic. And it's also kind of ridiculous. Yes, accountability must be identified and, justice must be served. But there's a lot of opportunists jumping in to the fray and perpetuating nonsense. Not the least of which is the governor, was it the governor of Texas? Or the mayor of one of its cities. I forget who. But somebody big, some mucky muck, forgive I don't have a citation right here. I think it was the governor. Tried to blame the Green New Deal, right? Which didn't exist, doesn't exist, has yet to be voted on, and has absolutely nothing to do with the way the Texas grid has been run for the last 20 years. And for anybody listening that isn't fully aware, here's what I've come to understand. Just to review the situation and hopefully help mitigate and or fight off the ongoing misinformation about it and all the political shenanigans. If Texas is going to hold anybody accountable, it needs to hold its own. I mean, if the people of Texas, pause. I want to make a clarification. It's one of those things that gets lost in common use. It is my preference that if I say just Texas, like Texas should hold itself accountable, I mean the state of Texas. The state of Texas. In other words, the bureaucracy, the politicians and the systems under which, the people who are actually responsible for making the choices that led to this outcome. That's who's responsible. If I mean to refer to the people of Texas, I'll always try to say the people of Texas. I'm only clarifying that because on social media, I got some misunderstanding going on in a community, in a thread. I was trying to share what I understood of the situation because there are people, blaming Biden and blaming the Green New Deal and blaming Obama for the situation in Texas. And that's just red meat to that political base, right? And it's arguably evidence of politically manipulative ideology or content being peddled. To the best of my understanding, from my limited ability to investigate it, because I really refuse to use the word research, because A, it's being overused, and most people who use it aren't actually doing, technically speaking, real research. But we'll get into that in another time. From the best of my ability to to look into it, over the last 20 years, the Texas power grid infrastructure has previously been disrupted severely, although not as severely as in this case, by previous extreme climate events. During that time, the state of Texas and its interrelated agencies that are responsible for the upkeep, the maintenance, and the improving and or operations and development of the power grid openly refused repeated regulatory recommendations to invest in strengthening the equipment in the grid, on the power grid, in anticipation of further extreme climatological events. That's sort of like, you can't draw any further, you can't connect any further dots in terms of accountability, as far as what I can tell. Right? Now, we can lay all kinds of critique at the federal level and how, generally speaking, the infrastructure is severely critically neglected, and that a lot of work needs to be put onto it, right? And that we just spent a 4-year administration of nothing but lip service and the blowing of smoke about some sort of infrastructure initiative. We never saw Infrastructure Week, just like we never saw Donald Trump's healthcare plan. Although, thank God, we're finally about to see, or at least the Supreme Court or whoever's investigating him is about to see his taxes. But that's a whole nother story. We'll talk about that in a minute. Texas, the people of Texas have my support and my love and my prayers and my meditations and my energy. I send it out, as I do to the best of my ability, to all those in the world, everywhere. Because while people are suffering in Texas, there's people suffering in every state of this great nation and in every country on the planet. And we are all impacted by that suffering. And we are all capable of doing something, even if it's little, even if it's just defending the truth against the misinformation. Pivoting to other thoughts and topics of the day, let's cleanse the palate with a bit of music, bringing you the first track from a new fictional album from your favorite animatronic DJ Zed, a track called Slow Burn, a Fauberg abstract cinematic remix live track. Thank you, DJ Zed. Weird and interesting as always. Moving on, in other news, as I started to ramble about a hot second ago, the Supreme Court, this was like the big breaking news of the morning as I was having my breakfast. The Supreme Court has apparently made it possible for, what is his name? Cy Vance of the Southern District of New York, if I'm not mistaken. I'm totally pulling that from memory. And dear friends and listeners, I have a memory for big things, but not sometimes not so great for the little things, the little details. But they're going to be finally, after 5 years of dodging and sidestepping and pretending to promise to release them. Let's not forget that. Let's reach way back to ye olde the ancient days when he was still competing against other Republicans to gain the nomination. I think I don't know, if memory serves me, he was being asked about his tax returns as early as that. And even if I'm a little off there, the consistent narrative from him has been he's under audit, so he can't release them, but as soon as he can, he will. And he never did. It's fascinating how many things he said he would do that he just stopped talking about. Never mind the things he said he would do and then said he did, which he didn't technically really do. Like saving, quote unquote, with sarcasm, that one air conditioning company during year one. He didn't save them. They did. They shipped off those jobs to another country anyways, they just did it from a different location. At any rate. So that's interesting news. And for anybody like myself who is of the opinion, granted, right? Like, it's an opinion, but I'm of the opinion that Trump is not what he pretends to be, right? That he has plenty of evidence in his pre-political lifespan to come to the conclusion that the most likely thing going on is just a big giant clusterfuck of scam artistry, hubris, and greed for power. Like, that's what's going on in his head. That's it, right? Like, his interests are entirely self-oriented. Which for some people sounds great, that's a whole big, deep subject we need to get into. We're going to be hearing, I am of the opinion that we're going to be hearing lots of interesting, teasing news over the next several weeks and months about this and the various other ongoing and or relatively new or soon to be announced, because I suspect that's going to happen too, investigations, criminal and civil, into Trump's behavior during his administration. Never mind the most recent, his final act of inciting a rather, doomed to fail insurrection. I think it was doomed to fail because he didn't invest enough. But I can do a whole special on what I think he was thinking, but it's irrelevant, right? Like, what I think he was thinking kind of doesn't matter, I guess. But what he does and what he says out there in the public record, that we can discuss and analyze to no end. One of the investigations I'm concerned with, though, that I think is sort of like setting itself up to fail, at least easily be considered, what's the word? Irrelevant? No. Just meaningless in the eyes of his supporters, is this call for a 9/11 style commission to investigate the events of January 6th. We just went through impeachment numero duo, which was all about that. And it's adorable, yet infinitely frustrating that Trump and his base of supporters consider both of those impeachments some sort of, what's the word they're always using? Not acquitted, because that's the actual thing that happened. He was acquitted. An acquittal doesn't mean that you're innocent. It just means that the trial failed to arrive at a conviction, right? And Trump, although he hasn't said it, I haven't heard him say it recently. He definitely said about the first impeachment that he was 100% totally exonerated by the results, which you can only believe if you have blind faith in Trump and never read the report that came out of, that investigation. Similarly, the second impeachment ended in acquittal, not because one side or the other had brilliant evidence and the other had lousy evidence, but because most of the needed votes were predetermined for it to land at an acquittal. As I said in a prior episode, the impeachment process is openly a political beast, right? And yet it gets characterized, when it is convenient, as an actual, criminal court proceeding, which it is not. So neither of those two impeachments exonerated him. And what I worry about, and that's just a fact, right? They did not exonerate him. People will say he's totally exonerated, but that's like saying the sun is purple in color. I mean, it might be in an invisible spectrum of light, but it isn't to our eyeballs, right? And that was a really weak analogy, which undermines itself, and I apologize for that. Here's my concern with the 9/11 style commission investigation. By calling it that, by branding it that right up front before it even becomes a reality, the Trump base, especially those still clinging to the QAnon content, are going to preemptively dismiss the entire process as a conspiracy, right? As new conspiracy content, as evidence that the cabal is out to destroy Trump. Ironically, my other concern with a 9/11 style commission is that no matter what they find and no matter how they present it, the divide will remain, right? Trump and the base will believe himself to be exonerated by sheer fact of, by sheer willpower of Trump saying that he was. And it won't satisfy the coalition of those against Trump because nothing will come of it. Who knows? Let's put a pin in that and find and look forward to those developments, right? The thing I'm more keenly interested in terms of this little nexus of post-Trumptopian matters, is the surprisingly large number of low-profile criminal investigations that are kind of hurtling his way. So we got to keep an eye on that development too. One of those investigations, if not multiple, should, in theory, land Trump in some minimal amount of criminal, not exposure, because the exposure is happening now. He has potential criminal, in criminal charges. That's what I'm trying to say, and that it is not too beyond the pale or beyond the realm of possibility that Trump, within 3 or 4 years, may very well find himself indicted and arrested and held accountable for some aspect of his plethora, his cornucopia of criminal activity in recent years. Of course, I firmly believe in the axiom of, presuming someone's innocence until they're proven guilty. I think that doesn't mean we should ignore evidence, right? That means that we should treat the person under investigation with all the rights and due process of someone who is innocent. The thing is, if it quacks like a duck and walks like a duck and swims like a duck and flies like a duck, it's probably a duck. And from long before Trump ever announced to run for office, he has been an individual operating on the shadier side of things. And that's just undeniable. Take a look at the plethora of lawsuits in his past and the way they've been resolved. And it astounds me how many people have such profound blind faith in him and refuse to look at the public record of lawsuits and criminal indictments, etc., against him, right? It's not like he hasn't been in trouble with the law before, to some degree or another, in some shape, form, or fashion. At any rate, I'm beating a dead horse, right? Because anybody who's listening who isn't a Trump supporter probably already agrees that it's pretty clear that he's a liar, a con artist, a cheat. And anybody who's still clinging to him has got, the blinders on and the earplugs in. So, at any rate, let us hope for the best and invest our conscious awareness and intent in hoping, in praying and facilitating the manifestation of genuine justice, not out of some hatred for the guy. Let me make this clear, and I probably another dead horse to be beaten here, but I do not hate Donald Trump. I do not advocate hating Donald Trump. I don't hate anybody, even if I'm deeply frustrated by them or whatever. I refuse to resort to hating people, even if they've done me personally wrong. And trust me, that's hard, right? But anger is just a poison that damages our self. And hatred is just, what's that old Buddhist saying? Anger or hatred is like holding on to a burning coal, like it doesn't damage the other person. That is not the way that saying goes, and I apologize to you, but I think you get the image enough, right? There's another version of that, or another saying that goes, anger or hatred is taking poison, is drinking poison because of what someone else did. It really doesn't make sense if you process it and think about it. Of course, our emotions are our emotions, and they feel like we cannot control them. It's not about control, in my opinion. It's about forgiveness and healing. When negative, turbulent, frustrating, painful emotions come up, when anger or depression or whatever come up, it's not about trying to control them or destroy them or block them out or obliterate them. It's about sitting with them, healing them, and reintegrating them. And extrapolating from that, I think that to some degree, the solution to our political problems can be addressed in a similar way. Something I'll talk about more on the other side of this next track, because DJ Zed is clamoring to be a little bit more consistently integrated in the show, right, DJ Zed? Let's do Architecture Groovin' Matrix, a brain dance groove pad audio entertainment track. I really like that one, Mr. Zed. Sorry, I don't know why sometimes I want to call you Mr. Zed. He gives me the coldest of animatronic glares when I accidentally do that. Sorry, DJ Zed. I really like that track. I just wanted to say that. Like, that wanted me to get up. That almost got me up on my feet and wiggling, which is always a good sign. So thank you for that bit of entertainment. I'm going to save that one. Where'd it go? Here we go. We're going to save that one to replay it in the not too distant future. Boom. Okay, so we're back. Friends, let's zoom out. Human tragedy, political comedy, and, the world is on fire. No matter where you look, it's chaos and craziness. Myanmar, Yemen, and everywhere in between. What can we do, right? It's overwhelming, and it's a little crazy making. And it's all, what am I trying to say? It's all so large, so chaotic, so overwhelming that it can be depressing, and it can leave anybody feeling like, well, fuck it, there's nothing I can do. And it's not made any better. It's being exacerbated, right? Like, it's bad enough that horrible things are happening. On top of that, there is, from my perspective, an alarming increase and disturbing, like, next level sophistication of manipulative content being deployed around the world and then perpetuated by people otherwise well-intentioned. Here's one, it's not a new meme. It's kind of an oldie. It's kind of a goldie. And it's one of those memes that's really hard to disagree with. The guy not Zig Heiling at the German Nazi parade or whatever it is. Remember that? It's been around for a long time. There's a classic, from Nazi Germany photo wherein if you zoom in, if you look really closely, there's one guy in the crowd not giving the salute. And for years now, that meme has been like, be this guy. In a world sliding towards fascism, be this guy. Now, who can disagree with that? Nobody, right? But let's take another couple steps back and consider the following oddity, this curious phenomena that's happening. At least I seem to be perceiving evidence of this. Am I making a mountain out of a molehill? Possibly. That's an easy criticism. But I've noticed the following curious phenomenon. People who self-identify ideologically as being part of the right wing are posting that with either overt declaration or subtle implication that the tyranny that is rising is all the left's fault. Simultaneously, there are people on the left posting that meme with either the overt or covert implication that the tyranny that's rising is all on the right. Now, this can be dismissed as, oh, what a silly coincidence, or, oh, people just being people. But there seems to be this progression in tribalistic us versus them, we are superior, they are inferior kind of conditioning. And it's becoming so pervasive that the groups divided are becoming more and more entrenched. Even when they have a lot of interests or needs in common. I recognize that any one given example of this kind of content can be quickly dismissed or rationalized. But if you zoom out and think about its impact, its psychological impact, what I think we can see if we really contemplate it and look and observe impartially, without judgment, right? Just going, what are people doing and saying? I think that it becomes clear that the tribes, the political parties, the various labels being impacted by this kind of content, subversive content, are fixating on laying blame. Now that's radically different than holding accountable, in my humble opinion. And the worst part is that they're blindly laying blame at the presumed other as guided by this indoctrination content, right? The left hates the right hates the left. Even those who try to bridge the gap in the middle have a lot of angst and stress and to fixate on dividing the world's population between good and evil, that's the goal, right? And you can just keep creating these divisions. The left is evil, the right is good. The right is good and the left is evil. And then you get into the subtlety that the same sort of forces are at work within these tribes. Right now, it's really painfully obvious that the Trump core of the Republican base and what remains of what was once the Republican base are being manipulated to be at odds with each other. Ever so subtly, ever so insidiously, that's like, it's really hard to pick up. But they've created this divide, right? And they can sit around and lay blame and whatever, but if all they're doing is attacking each other, what are they solving? Similarly, I see lines of division being drawn over there on Team Blue. It's the progressives versus the moderates, and then a sort of like antagonism towards Biden as the figurehead of the Blue Party. What am I trying to say? We're never going to solve problems if we approach any problem with an us versus them framework, right? We can't solve a problem if you are evil and I am virtuous and true. Like, you and I can never solve a problem together. To fixate on dividing the world's population between good and evil, in my humble opinion, is to literally give into or be seduced by or be snarled up in playing out the us versus them, tribalistic, self-elitist manipulation indoctrination that is flooding society. In my humble opinion, and plenty of people will knee-jerkedly react in disagreement. But I state this as something that I think transcends political ideology and therefore should be investigated. In my humble opinion, there are no good people or evil people. There are only people. No one person is a monolith of one thing or the other. No one human being is perfect. No one human being is evil. Now, there are some deeply flawed, deeply messed up, and or crazy, psychopathic, human beings. Are they the embodiment of evil? It's really easy to agree to that, isn't it? But what if they're just deeply traumatized? What if they're just broken inside because of our ongoing societal neglect of the deep spiritual healing that is needed? Why isn't that the approach that we take, right? It is, I understand the arguments like Hannibal Lecter, evil. Hannibal Lecter is a cartoon character, right? He's a character from film. But real people in the world have done horrible things like that. It gets really difficult to talk about healing them with folks because their atrocities, their actions, their flaws, their grotesqueness is offensive. But we must always try to step back and not view the world from our baseline knee-jerk responses of things, right? We're better than that, I thought. By extension, so there's so many thoughts in my head right now. Setting aside the problematic issue of truly like extreme case scenarios of individuals who do horrible things, because I think that's, those extremes can be accounted for and sort of weeded out of this conversation or exploration for the purposes of finding a solution to the more mundane issue. Right, like axe murderers got to be held accountable, got to put them away, got to keep everyone safe from the axe murderers. I don't doubt that. Do we objectify them and torture them? That's probably a bad choice. Do we bring the power of science and spirituality, which I think are not mutually exclusive? Do a whole episode on that. Put a pin up on the board, please. Can we bring the power of science and spirituality to bear on those individuals to try to bring about healing? I think that's a noble and worthy cause. And curiously, we don't do very much of that, right? We lock them up, and in best case scenarios, we lock them up and treat them somewhat humanely. But in the worst case scenarios, they get what people think is coming to them. But setting that issue aside, right? Like, because the Hannibal Lecters of the world are extreme cases. Having said that, those extreme cases, I think, point to the extremity, the extremeness of the societal spiritual trauma, of the species-wide spiritual trauma. I don't know why it is, but some people become extreme examples of the worst case scenario of what it means to be damaged by that trauma. In my humble opinion, the us versus them tribalistic divisive manipulation works because it anchors the vilification of others on those kinds of examples, right? A serial murderer is easily portrayed as unforgivable and unredeemable. Now, when you then vilify an entire group of people as evil, you allow, the indoctrination allows for the association of that level of being unredeemable, of being unforgivable, to those that aren't axe murderers, just the other side of a divisive issue that's being manipulated to us versus them, tribalistic, self-extremist, and otherification. People are people, right? And some days people are wonderful examples of the best humanity can be. And some days people are examples of the worst that humanity can be. And the average, ordinary, run-of-the-mill human individual is a gooey mess of both the light and the dark, and struggling to find balance or to heal that without understanding, without really knowing what's going on. And it's that healing that I'm, constantly, probably redundantly calling for, that seems to be the big, giant, shiny pink elephant in the room of things that that get oppressed that everyone else that's fighting gets distracted from. I am of the opinion, based on, everything I've gone through, that there is literally and meaningfully, tangibly, a deep need and an urgent calling for all of us as individuals and as a collective to turn inwards and focus on what can only be described as spiritual healing. And I don't mean this brand or that brand, this church or that church, that guru or this guru. I mean natural, organic, spiritual healing. If we are busy identifying with this label or that label and fighting against those that we are told oppose the label, how can we achieve that healing? And it's everywhere, right? There is no one group or political party, and I get a lot of flack for this. There's two wings, and they're attached to the same bird. I'm not saying that the Democratic Party is exactly like the Republican Party. Of course they're wildly different. They're wearing different hats. They're doing different jobs. But they're attached to the same system. And they fight each other at the pleasure of the system. Neither party is ever going to win the fight. I've delved into the subject of why we fight and why politics is about fighting on a few episodes in the past, so hopefully you'll stumble into those. Put a pin on it, because I'll probably come back to it again in the future. But set that aside, right? Like, the calling is to heal. That's what Jesus taught. That's what Buddha taught. That's what every legitimate spiritual speaker who spoke, to the best of my ability to discern, inspired by that which we call divinity, they taught and spoke and advocated for healing. Fighting each other over who is evil and who is good, to the best of my ability to discern, contributes very little to that needed healing. And if Myanmar or Burma, the first Buddhist nation, right, that tried to create a community that was deeply inspired by Buddhism, look where they're at now, right? That's a whole interesting, weird phenomena going on. I see a lot of parallels between what is happening in, now that I said Burma, I can't remember Myanmar. What's happening in Myanmar in terms of the military stepping in and arresting one political party, and sort of taking control of things with the claim that they're trying to stabilize the government and then put someone, appropriate in power. Although not exactly. It has a lot of parallels to what especially the QAnon base or faction of the Trump base believed was going to happen here in the United States. They believed that on Inauguration Day, the military was going to step in and intervene to make sure that Trump stayed in power. It didn't. And curiously, they now have shifted the goalposts. And, those that remain in the ideological cluster there, I don't want to call them a cult, but it's a cult of personality, for sure. They're now hoping and believing that it's going to happen March 4th, March 15th, March something, sometime in March, because of all these different reasons. The most interesting of which is that was when the original inauguration date was, until a bunch of things changed, which they say is part of the cabal taking over the country, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. this, well, we'll have to wait and see what happens, but it sounds like very manipulative, like taking the manipulation to the furthest level before it completely falls apart, right? I could be dead wrong, and I hope and pray every day that I'm not, because if I'm wrong and Trump succeeds somehow, then we're in for it, right? We're in for a hell of a ride. But I remain somewhat hopeful that in the coming months, hopefully it doesn't take more than 3 years, the momentum towards a criminal indictment and arrest will become clearer and clearer. And that as that progresses, those who have clung on to Trump blindly so far will finally begin to realize the depth of the manipulation and the level of how unworthy of his blind faith and blind adoration Trump really is. Because he's not. No politician should become an idol. It's just inherently flawed. No politician should be idolized and worshipped. No politician should be followed with blind faith. They are supposed to be public servants. And we, the public, are supposed to hold them accountable, not fight to the death to defend their lies. So let us keep praying that justice and accountability will manifest itself in a meaningful and healthy way, so that Trump himself as an individual has to confront his own life choices, and that the base has to confront their choices about him. And hopefully from that, new levels of political healing happen. Mind you, like I said, two wings, one bird. The same thing's got to happen on the left, right? There are people who are sliding down the slippery slope of idolizing Biden just because he's different from Trump, or just because of the nostalgia from before Trump. No politician should be idolized. All politicians should be held accountable for their words and their actions. Their actions and their words. Ultimately, though, as an acquaintance of mine recently reminded me, as we explore these ideas and thoughts, we must not neglect or ignore the question of what does this mean for me? Like, how do I step up to that within? And it sounds silly and probably cliche, but the most powerful thing any individual, i.e. yourself, can do is turn inwards and abdicate. That doesn't mean destroy. That doesn't mean completely abandon. That doesn't mean react in a sort of hypocritical way towards that which you've been attached to. It just means to set it down. Abdicate political ideology. Abdicate religious ideology. Even abdicate spiritual ideology. For that is a problem too. We'll have to come back to that. But just as I see an alarming spike in manipulative content in all corners of political society, I see a spike in manipulative content in all the various spiritual communities that I, try to keep a little bit of an eye on. But we'll come back to that in a hot second. It's the same sort of discussion, but it's in spiritual terms. Abdication. What's the point? The point is to set those things down so that we have clarity of our consciousness, right? To set those things down, we must confront that we've been clinging to them. And in that process, we might realize that they've been manipulating us, right? Our ideologies. Societal ideologies, political ideologies, spiritual ideologies, political ideologies. Now, nothing is an absolute, right? None of those ideologies is absolutely evil or absolutely good. But there is an evolving problem of corruption creeping in, of manipulative content trying to fly under the radar into these communities to perpetuate distractionary, conflict-causing, manipulative content. And it's pervasive, right? And it is not new. But I've rambled on long enough for today, friends, haven't I? I always tend to go longer than I intend to, but such is the way of my mind. As always, thank you for tuning in and supporting the show. If you appreciate the kinds of crazy things I ramble about, please do share the show with your friends and neighbors. If you have access to the internet and are on Facebook, come on down to the Almost Daily Zencast Facebook page and share your thoughts, questions, comments, etc. Until next time, friends, I have been your humble host, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. I'm going to hand it over here to DJ Zed to play you a bit of music. I might pop in if any additional thoughts come to mind, but otherwise, this is the end of the show, and I will catch you next time. Here we go with, which one? Which one should you play? DJ Zed. Let's do, have I played that? We've played that one already recently? Let's play one we haven't played super recently. Ah, yes. The Cosmic Electro remix live track that you've entitled New Star Blasting.